morning. As your director of music, I'd like to share a few thoughts with you this morning before we listen to the morning's special music. If you are like me, you have missed being in our sanctuary on Sunday mornings. Maybe you have missed a special stained glass window, the many symbols within our sanctuary, or the powerful organ that shakes our walls. I have missed being the first one into the sanctuary each Sunday morning. For when I enter that beautiful vast space, I feel the breath of God within the walls, and I feel the unity of all those who have gone on before us, who helped to shape Grace's history. However, what I've missed most is seeing the wonderful people of Grace and being a part of the fellowship that we have together. A few weeks ago, a colleague of mine posted a video of his young 4-year-old daughter. At the door of the house, she wailed, "I'm done with this. I'm done with these people." We can feel her pain. There are days when we too could say the same. I'm done with online teaching and this shaggy hair. I'm done not being able to sit down at an extended family meal or to go out without a mask. There are times, yes, we know that through Christian love, we should be staying away, and we would have it no other way. Yet there are days that we would join her in saying, "I'm done with this." This Monday, I was at that breaking point, and it is always in those moments that God speaks in His still, small voice. This time, the word came through my Brazilian students. Students from all over Brazil had joined together to create a virtual handbell performance. They used the tone chimes that our church had helped to purchase to perform Amazing Grace. Each student in their own city and house, each with a different set of tone chimes that Grace Church helped to give. And it was with this simple act and gift that God reminded me that regardless of our location, we are always together, always united in our praise of God. In appreciation for your gift to these special students and your global mission, I would like to share their virtual performance with you today.
I trust you are remaining safe and well at home these days. I believe this is the sixth Sunday that we have not been able to gather for worship. I hope that these videos we are making are helpful to you, but that it won't be much longer until we can gather at Grace Church again. We can certainly take care to maintain social distancing once we are back in the sanctuary, but I hope it won't be too much longer. Today is the third Sunday, or this Sunday is the third Sunday of Easter, and we turn to a most familiar passage in the Gospels, the story which took place on the road to Emmaus in Luke chapter 24. Now, on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them all the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead, as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. The gospel of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. About 15 years ago, I witnessed the most remarkable event. I wasn't actually there, but I watched it on television, as many of you may have done. There's something that I noticed about it that I have never forgotten. It was, of all things, a funeral. In fact, the largest funeral in human history. It wasn't the funeral of a king or a queen or a princess, or a president or a prime minister. It wasn't the funeral of a rock star or a movie star. It wasn't the funeral of a basketball player or a football player or of a beauty queen or a general or someone who died tragically at a young age. It was the funeral of an old man who owned nothing. No money, no property, no belongings. He was, in fact, a priest, a Polish priest, who traveled the world representing his church, proclaiming a message of peace and reconciliation, a message of grace and responsibility. He was known to us as Pope John Paul II. The thing that I realized while I was watching that event was that the world and its people are hungry to hear what the church has to say. So much so that they gathered around this event, this funeral, in numbers like have never been seen before. The world and the world's people are hungry to hear what the church has to say. There is greater need and greater appreciation for the church's faith and ministry now than ever before, and the people of the world want to hear it. For you see, just like those disciples of long ago who were resurrection witnesses, we too are resurrection witnesses. Now remember what I said a couple of weeks ago. It's not because anybody saw Jesus step out of the tomb. No one saw that. I think Martin Luther said it best. We are moved to faith not by an empty tomb, but by the Christ-filled world. For when we encounter Christ in our world, in each other, that's what moves us to faith. And the world is hungry to hear what the church has to say when we talk about our faith, when we act as resurrection witnesses and allow the Christ in us to emerge and express himself and touch others. There is greater and greater appreciation for the church's faith and ministry now than ever before, and the people of the world want to hear it. If only we could convince the church, if only we could convince ourselves to stop focusing on our property, on our need for members and money, on our buildings, on our history, if only we could speak courageously and responsibly about what we know to be true instead of focusing on what we hope to be true. If we could focus on what we believe rather than on our superstitions. If we could focus on being resurrection witnesses rather than representing an institution. We tend to look to the rich and famous, to those who are powerful and strong and beautiful, to gauge the course of our lives and the significance of our living. All the while, though, the hunger within us, the desperate needs of our souls, are touched by an ancient gospel that bears witness to an invisible reality spoken by people who are not seeking wealth or power or notoriety for themselves. Resurrection witnesses we are. I recently read a legend about a king who set aside a special day to honor the greatest subject in his kingdom. The big day arrived, and there was a large gathering in the palace courtyard. 4 finalists were brought forward, and from these 4, the king would select the winner, the greatest subject in his kingdom. The first person presented was a wealthy philanthropist. The king was told that this man was highly deserving of the honor because of his humanitarian efforts. He had given much of his wealth to those in need. The second candidate was a celebrated physician. The king was told that this doctor was highly deserving of the honor, the greatest subject in the kingdom, because he had rendered faithful and dedicated service to the sick for many years, decades, in fact. The third person was a distinguished judge. The king was told that the judge was worthy because she was noted for her wisdom and her fairness and her brilliant decisions, her love for justice. And then came the fourth person, the last one, an elderly woman. Everyone was surprised to see her because her manner was quite humble, her dress unremarkable. She hardly looked the part of one who would be honored as the greatest subject in the kingdom, especially as she took her place standing beside the wealthy philanthropist, the celebrated physician, and the distinguished judge. What chance could she possibly have when compared to the others who had accomplished so much of being the greatest subject in the kingdom? Even so, there was something about her simple appearance, her understanding eyes, her quiet confidence. The king was intrigued, to say the least, and somewhat puzzled by her presence. And so before they could make the presentation, he stood and asked, "Why is she here? Who is she?" And the answer came, "You see, Your Majesty, you see the philanthropist, the doctor, and the judge? Well, she was their teacher. This woman, the woman who had no wealth, no fortune, no title, but she had given herself unselfishly, given her life unselfishly to produce great people. There's nothing more powerful and Christ-like. Her students flourished because of what they experienced, what they witnessed in her. And so it's our mission, my friends. It is our mission as resurrection witnesses to see that the church and the world flourish because of what we give. There's nothing more powerful or Christ-like than that. We make a mistake when we think that Easter is about Jesus. Resurrection is about Jesus. That's what happened to him. He was raised from the dead. But Easter is about the disciples and what happened to them. It was their vision that was changed, their lives that were transformed by what they witnessed and what they saw and what they experienced. They are the ones who carried the great good news of Jesus' resurrection to the world. We, like they, are resurrection witnesses, not because we saw it happen, but because we have seen its effects. History redirected, lives transformed, communities of faith created, sacrificial giving, and selfless compassion. All of this, and so much more, the residue, the result, the effects of Jesus' resurrection, have blown across the world and throughout history because of the resurrection witnesses who have taken seriously their call to spread the great good news and to represent Jesus in the world and in history. And it all started that night on the road to Emmaus as two discouraged men walked in defeat and fear. But despite it all, they witnessed the resurrection. They experienced their own Easter. And then they told others the story everyone was hungry to experience. And Easter began that night on the road to Emmaus and then back in Jerusalem. Easter began to cover the world and its people. There's a story about a young boy named Walter Elias that I love to hear and I love to tell. Walter Elias was born in the city, but his parents one day moved out to the country to become farmers. Walter had a vivid imagination, and the farm was the perfect place for a young boy and a wondering mind. One day in the apple orchard, he was amazed when he saw, sitting on the branch of one of the apple trees, an owl. He just stood there and stared at the owl. He thought about what his father had told him about owls. They always rested during the day because they hunted throughout the night. The owl was asleep. He also thought, Walter Elias also thought, that this owl might make a great pet. So, being careful not to make any noise, he carefully stepped over the sticks and the leaves as he made his way toward the branch where the owl was sitting. The owl was in a deep sleep because it never heard Walter Elias walking toward it. Finally, standing just under him, Walter Elias reached up and grabbed the owl by the legs. Now, the events that followed are difficult to explain. Suddenly, everything was utter chaos. The owl came to life. Walter's thoughts about keeping the bird as a pet were quickly forgotten. The air was filled with wings and feathers and screeching. In the excitement, instead of letting go of the bird, Walter held the legs tighter. And in his panic, Walter Elias, still holding tightly to the owl, threw it to the ground and stomped the bird to death. After things calmed down, Walter looked at the now dead and bloody bird, and he began to cry. He ran back to the barn and found a shovel, and he buried the owl in the orchard. He tried to forget, but he couldn't. At night, he would lie awake, worrying about what he had done. And when he fell asleep, he would dream about that owl. As the years passed, he became an adult. He became an old man, but Walter Elias was never able to forget what had happened that day. It affected him for the rest of his life. As an older man, he said that he never ever killed anything ever again. Something significant had happened to Walter Elias that day, not just in the killing of that bird, but after that. Something which transformed him. And he spent the rest of his life giving back to that owl that he had killed. And he did it in the only way that he could, the way that Walter Elias was gifted and talented to do, by bringing thousands of beautiful, irresistible animals to life in books, in films, and on the stage that have delighted the lives of millions upon millions of people day after day for decades. All the result of the tragic, unnecessary death long ago, but also the result of the remarkable life and work of Walter Elias Disney. It was something he witnessed, something he participated in, that made this difference in his life and transformed his life. The resurrection of Jesus changes everything. It transforms us. It moves us from despair to hope to new possibilities for life. It takes us in our blindness and opens our eyes. It transforms ordinary bread into a holy meal. It takes two sad and lost brothers on the road to Emmaus and gives their world back to them. Jesus comes to them and says, "See, I am not dead. I am alive. Now tell the world what you have witnessed." At the end of this story, the two brothers get up and walk back to Jerusalem and tell the disciples what they have seen, what they have heard. That's what being a disciple is all about. And that's all it is, really. Telling what you've seen, telling what you've heard, telling your friends about all that you have experienced. You don't have to be a pope. You don't have to be a Billy Graham. You simply tell what you have seen, that you've seen ordinary people gather in a community of grace and care and faith and compassion, that you've seen people move to generosity by a crying need, that you yourself have experienced the powerful change in your perspective, change in your values, change in your life because of what you have experienced and seen. The resurrection is significant enough, powerful enough to do the rest of the work for us. The resurrection of Jesus was the power behind the witness of the disciples. It was the power behind those two brothers on the road to Emmaus. It was the power behind your witness. It is the power behind your witness as well. We are resurrection witnesses. We are the ones who have experienced the power of God's presence in Jesus Christ within ourselves, within the community of faith at Grace Church, and throughout the world. More importantly, we know now in ways that we never knew before that we live in a world that is starving for what we have seen, anxious to hear the story, and to live in the afterglow of the resurrection, if only we have the courage to tell what we have witnessed, to tell the story. Amen.